Hello, I'm author Nancy Flinchbaugh, and this is my podcast, Writing for Change. Today I'm interviewing a teacher, Madeline Vukson, who teaches for change, and we're talking about her experience with the Witness Tree Institute of Ghana. Madeline, or Maddie for short, is an English language arts teacher at Humboldt High School in St. Paul Public Schools, St. Paul, Minnesota. I enjoyed getting to know her last summer as we both participated in the second cohort of the Witness Tree Institute of Ghana's Summer 2025 program. Please join me in welcoming Madeline Buxon. Well, welcome, Maddie. It's good to see you again. And thank you for agreeing to talk with me about our trip to Ghana. And I just wanted to ask you, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into teaching and what you teach.
All right. Good morning, Nancy. Thank you for having me here today. Um, so I'm Madeline Vukson. I'm starting my 13th year at Humboldt High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. A little bit about myself. I enjoy gardening, traveling, reading, and spending time with my family. Um, I'm in a kickball league, and I just signed up for softball for the first time in many years, so I'm excited about that. I got into teaching middle school or teaching in general. I initially wanted to be a professor, an English professor, right? Like teach the big topics and go into feminism study and all sorts of things. And um, I went and I decided to get my master's degree and I started um teaching high school and I was like, okay, I could just maybe do high school like AP classes. And then of course, like the only positions that were open during this time were middle school openings. And I was like, oh my God, middle school, that's like the worst. Like everyone is weird. Like I didn't really enjoy my middle school years. Um, but as I kept teaching and especially in the middle school years, I found that I really enjoyed it and I found that the kids were at this very interesting balance of like being really inquisitive about like big topics in the world, but also very playful. And so I think one of the things that I've really appreciated over the years of teaching middle school is just how inquisitive and thoughtful they are about these big topics in the world. But also there's still like a playfulness and a silliness that you don't always get with the high school and the college level.
So you found your niche there
Yeah, I did.
unexpectedly. Yeah.
hmm
So what motivated you to apply and participate in the Witness Tree program?
So, I've always kind of been fascinated with history, even though I'm an English teacher. And a few years ago, I think we've talked about this, I did a civil rights legacy program through the National Endowment of Humanities. And I took some time before the program and after the program to really explore the Deep South and really learn about the civil rights movement. And through my time in that program, it seemed like traveling to West Africa seemed to be an important piece in that journey and learning about Black history and civil rights and what does it really mean in the context of current times. Um, and I had met a friend there. He's a teacher in Texas, and he had done this program previous to doing this going down south. Um, and so he said, "Yeah, this is a great program." And I had like the website pulled up on my phone for actually like 3 years. And every summer, oh, this maybe would be a good summer to apply, or this, maybe I should do it this summer. And then I never got around to it. And finally, I was like, okay, like I will just apply and see what happens. And at least then I can like have that tab like checked off my checklist kind of because I had been like talking about it for so long and thinking about it for so long. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of how it came about. And it seemed like it was a nice combination of like exploring culture, but also focused on like working with like the Ghanaian teachers and understanding like the educational system. And So yeah,
Yeah,
that
great.
was
Yeah.
what kind of drew my attention to it.
We kind of had a similar path. Like I went to the South and I was writing a book on
Hmm.
Flat Sea Islands. And then I also wanted to go to West Africa because it seems like to get a more complete understanding.
Yeah. Hmm. For sure.
Perfect program for you as a teacher.
Mhm.
So, what were some important things that you learned during your witnessry experience? Did you say?
I think for me, I kind of have had two kind of experiences. Like the first one's always like history and kind of understanding our role as humans on the earth always has like a very personal level, right? Like I can't be a good teacher unless I really understand like my role in the universe and my role on earth and how these things are all connected. And then there's also like the logistical like teaching part of like how can I take these things and like apply them to the classroom? And for me, like I don't know if it's because like I'm like a Cancer horoscope sign or I'm very emotional, but I have to like feel it first before I can like bring it into my classroom, right? It has to be meaningful to me. Like I was one of those students where like if I didn't have a connection with you, like I wasn't gonna do the work. Like I didn't want to do it, you know, like I would do it, but I didn't really care that much about it. And so for me, kind of really understanding like the community and like the kind of social capital that the Ghanaian society has and really understanding how like we're all like interconnected and we can understand history, but we can also let it motivate us to continue further are really important things to me because I think as like an American, like we're so individualistic and it's just so counterintuitive to how we are set up as like social creatures. And I think like that social capital and that community piece I know for me was kind of missing or at least like kind of wearing out in that part of my life because I was so focused on work. It was like, what about like my community of family and friends and other things that I do? Um, and so I think for me it was like very restorative and kind of like con grounded me again a little bit in like what are the things that are important to me? What are the things that like Ghanaian culture, you know, has and what are they continuing to do to create a new way forward? And how do we learn from, as like, I feel like as an American teacher, what are things that I can take away that were powerful for me that I can bring into my classroom?
Can you expound on that a little bit? What would you say were some of the unique things in Ghanaian culture that really called to you or touched you?
I think, well, one thing I noticed was just even within like our cohort, we were like spending a lot of time together, right? Like breakfast and lunch and dinner. And for me, as more kind of like a balance of an introvert and extrovert, I was like, oh my God, this is like a lot of time with people. Like this is very like, oh, like it was a lot. But then, um, you know, and then also kind of I'll come back to that piece, but a lot of like the like singing pieces, like I'm not a good singer, and I was like, oh my God, why are we having to do this? But then I found when I came home, I felt like very lonely. Like the like first I was like rested and then I was sick, but it was like that community piece. It's like, oh, I like found myself like listening to some of the songs, or I found myself like calling, like calling my friends more and trying to like prioritize relationships. And I think that um I just think that that's so important and it's such a cliche, but I think like the Ghanaian teachers and Tete, they like exhibit it so well. Like they modeled it so well. Like they didn't have to like like a good teacher is someone who doesn't have to make something explicitly clear. Like you can just see through like the structure of the program that those are a priority.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I just thought the Ghanaian culture was wonderful, and I did feel like too that it was reflected through the people that we met. And when I try to explain it to people, I start talking about all those things, and it's a very positive experience.
Hmm. For sure.
So, well, just talked about this a little bit, but how do you think it will impact your teaching, and what are some of the new things that you're hoping to incorporate this year from your trip?
For me as a teacher, I feel like one of my strengths is like building relationships with students. Like I love it when they come back and they visit me and they become my TA or whatever the situation is. But I feel like this program really emphasized that and not just like individual like teacher-student relationship, but like how can I build that community more intentionally with all the students in my classroom? Like I find that I'm very good with like one-on-one or small groups or like as a whole class, but how do I ingrain myself so I'm more at like their level and that we all are learning from each other and not just like teacher student, but like student to student. I think sometimes at my school, it can be hard for students to like form friendships with each other. Like they kind of are friends if they're in a sports or a club, but other than that, like they're very isolated. And for a lot of them, even for me as a kid, like school, like I did every activity in school because like I didn't want to be at home, quite honest. Like I didn't want to be at home. I was in like every club I could join and wanted to be at school because that's where I felt like connected. That's where I felt I had a community. And how can I bring that into the classroom for like every single one of my students?
That's a wonderful goal, and that will be awesome.
Mhm.
You probably are already doing that to some extent, but you want to do it even more this year, more intentionally.
Yeah. And I think trying to explore more, I was very interested. Like we do some memoir writing and some other types of writing. And I'm trying to learn more about like the connections between like the food in the South and like the food we were eating in West Africa because there's a lot of connections there. And I think like that's a huge chunk of history. And my students love food. So anytime I can bring in like things about food or activities about food, they eat it up. They love it. So I think like finding more of like the nuanced things, right? Like not just like going over like here's Ghana, here's like a fun fact about it, but like really getting into like the nuanced details, like when we were exploring about like the trees, right? And how the trees like have oh, I can't remember exactly, but how they kind of like have those roots that grow underneath and they connect to each other even like a mile away. I think just really getting into like the details about those things and I think helps kids to see like that explicit like interconnectedness that we all have with each other.
Yeah, that was a great story. Yeah. Um, so we had, as you mentioned, teachers from both Ghana and the United States. What was that like for you to interact with the Ghanaian teachers?
Well, I think it was wonderful. They're just so kind and caring and I I found that throughout the school year problems in the school can feel very isolating and they can feel like, oh my God, why is this such a Humboldt thing? Or why is this like a St. Paul thing? Or why is this like a Minnesota thing? And then you talk to teachers, right? Like from other states, or in our case, like other states and other countries, and you realize that like a lot of these situations are similar, right? Like student engagement with middle schoolers, like 12 to 14-year-olds is very similar. Like, there's a lot of things that are similar among those groups of students, even if they're not on the same continent. And I think kind of listening to the teachers and how they they do such great work, even if they don't have as many resources as like American teachers do, right? And I think that just goes to show how important teaching is, like that you don't do it for the like it is such a cliche, but you don't do it for the money. You do it because relationships are important to you, community is important to you. You know the importance of like that literacy is liberation, right? When you learn how to read and write, you can advocate for yourself And I think just hearing the different ways that the Ghanaian teachers interact with their students and how much they care about them, it was just so, it was just very reassuring of my own philosophy of teaching. And I think for me, sometimes it can be very negative. And when you're around teachers who are like, I may not have this or this, but here's what I'm doing, and here's how we're singing and we're dancing, and it kind of pushes away all the other stuff and it really prioritizes like human interaction above all else. And I think that that's really important.
Well, that's a great way to learn and to celebrate, some of the similarities that you have too with the teachers, the other teachers.
Hmm.
We had a lecture on education, and a couple of things they stressed were that they work on teaching the whole child, the whole student, as well as teaching about the past and the traditional language, storytelling, music, dancing, wisdom. And so I just wondered how do you see that happening at your school? Are those things that you strive for or want to strive for?
So um I think I'm really lucky in that my school, Humboldt, even though we don't always have like the best reputation, we have like some of the best teachers, I feel like, because and counselors and support in our building because we work with a lot of students who have like a variety of different histories, right? And as I said earlier, like students don't learn from teachers they don't like, right? And so I think you have to build relationships and you have to focus on like the whole child. Like I think that at this point, I think as an educator and an advocate, if you're not doing that, then maybe teaching isn't for you. Which sounds like really aggressive, but I think it's true, right? Like you can't isolate teaching and education isn't isolated situations, right? Like my history is connected to what we're learning, right? And my identity is connected to what I'm learning. And um, I think like in the beginning of the year, really trying to get students to understand who they are, who I am. I have to understand who they are, what are their interests, um, and really bringing that into the classroom, I think is essential. And I was like I said, I found this program very reassuring of some of the things that I do in the classroom in focusing on like the whole child and focusing on like what are your interests? I give kids like a lot of kind of room with some of our projects to focus on like what's something that you care about that like or you want to read because it isn't about me as a teacher, right? Like I'm kind of just like the middleman between like the resources, the actual like content and the students. And
Mhm.
so my goal is like if they're not seeing themselves in the curriculum, if they're not seeing how they play a role in our society and how important they are in our society, right? Even as like a world of human beings, then I don't feel like I'm doing my job as an educator.
Mhm.
And I love that they brought in like so much like singing and dancing and kinesthetic work because we have like block scheduling at my school. So it's like 77 minutes. And it's always a reminder, like last week, I was sitting in these staff meetings. I was like, I need to like get up. Like I can't sit here. I was worse than my middle schoolers, I feel like. But it's like a reminder that like I'm an adult and I'm getting bored and antsy, right? Like imagine students who don't have like the emotional regulation sitting in your classroom and how are you engaging them and making them feel worthy and building their confidence and showing them that like school is part of a larger like educational process and learning experience.
Do you dance and sing in your class?
Okay, not always, but maybe I will try this year. I do have, when I did my creative writing classes, we did a little bit of movement. I call it movement activities. You get up and you move around. That's like, you know, I'm gonna go a little bit off topic, but I found it very interesting because my students, they do love to like sing and dance. And I'm always like, you guys take the stage. Like, if you want to lead us in a dance, like, I let them come up and lead us in a dance or sing. But it's interesting because like I feel like in my classroom most of the time, 99% of the time, I'm like the only white person, right? And like that cultural difference of I feel like white Minnesotans tend to be very like stiff and Scandinavian. And you want me to dance? Oh, like we don't dance at our like we're very kind of like boring people. Like I don't mean that in a mean way, but it's not always like integrated into our culture. And I think how do you kind of like decolonize the classroom a little bit and bring in what connects to the students versus like what makes you comfortable as a teacher?
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of also one of my goals this year is like how to bring in more movement. I'm not going to say singing, maybe in my advisory. I have like a literary arts advisory, and we have like us one of our subcommittees is dancing. So like I will let them take the lead, and if they want to sing, I'll let them. But it's intimidating, I think. And I think one of the things that this program did was like it pushes you out of your comfort zone, right? Like I like to be in the back. I like to take notes. Like I'm very like Western in my approach to like education. And one of the things I've had to like learn in teaching students who are not of that background, right? Who are from different countries and different cultures is that like the way I learn isn't necessarily how it's best for my students, you know? And as I've gotten older, I've realized like the note taking and sitting like okay that I can do that for a little bit, but like I said last week at the meeting after like 20 minutes I was over it. I wanted to get up and move. And so I think challenging yourself to grow as an educator and pushing and finding new ways to engage students is important. And I think programs like this really help educators become better educators through that way.
That's good. That's a lot of growth and learning and trying to continue to figure out how to make that happen in your classroom and letting the students lead the dancing. That sounds like a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great.
So would you encourage other teachers to apply to this program? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it takes like a certain type of person to apply for this program. Like you have to be in the right mindset. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable, or you have to be at least willing to try. And I think, I would love to have more educators from Minnesota kind of step out of the comfort zone a little bit and do a program like this because I think it's important that you recognize like your one way of thinking about the world is only one tiny slice, right? And that if you don't start expanding, how are you teaching the students in your classroom?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it's important to learn from others and to realize, yeah, we think the way we get our own thinking and we think that's the way things are. And then you meet new people and you find out, wow, there's a different way of living, that I hadn't even considered.
yeah, and I think like in our culture is so divisive and so just like it has to be this one way. This is the one way, and I feel like the educational system right now is really being pulled in a direction of kind of going backwards and has been being pulled in a direction of going backwards. And how do you push against that to go forward in a more like socially just way? And I think programs like this, how can we push our students to get outside their comfort zone if we're unwilling to do it ourselves?
Yeah.
And like, how do we, you have to model the behavior you want to see. And that includes like the writing piece, but it also includes like that whole person piece, right? How do I model conflict? How do I model apologies in the classroom? How do I model being a good person and being kind and being compassionate? All of those things, kids look up to you as a teacher to model that. And if you're only teaching your content, that's all you're showing that's important. And we know that we need much more than that if we're going to continue down a path towards a better future for our students.
So that's kind of a segue into the next question. Would you say you teach for change? And if so, what changes are you hoping for in your students and in our society in general?
I mean, I think, of course, I want to say like, oh, I want to teach change. And I think like most teachers get into education because some teacher or the education system or both like shape their life, right? Or change their life. I know I would not be able to do the things that I've been able to do without the support of, my third grade teacher, Mrs. Harrington, or, my AP teacher, Miss Ashton, right? Like they're people who still really have an influence on me and like push me to become a better teacher. And I think what I would say like 10 years ago versus what I would say 5 years ago versus what I would say has changed over time. Like I think my goal is still the same, but I think right now one of my focus points is I think there's a couple. I think number one, I want education to be an experience for students versus just like a task, right? Like, I don't want them to come into my room and be like, here's our checklist of things we have to do today. I want them to have an experience, right? Like, how are we going to like integrate things? How are we going to be a community together, right? So they leave a little bit more energized than when they came. And I also think one of the things, another piece for me is like understanding and accepting perspectives. And I think like trying to get students to really understand like why do you have that viewpoint that you have, right? Not whether or not I agree with it. It's not about me. It's about where do you stand with these values or this thing, like whatever argument unit we're doing or whatever you want to persuade, and really pushing them to think about why do they have that belief or that viewpoint, and then what evidence can they explain and how can they articulate that, right? And how willing are they to listen to other points of views who are different than them? Because I think that's the piece that's missing is like even for me, I like struggle like if there's certain people who I know have certain beliefs, it's hard to be around that. It's a skill like to teach people to really be accepting of other viewpoints, right? Even if it's like, no, I prefer pizza over tacos, right? Like you have to start small and really build your way up into creating a community that's accepting and loving and focused on belonging. I think my third point that I was going to say was focused on joy and really trying to, like I said, make the classroom an experience for students, right? Like I think education, like I have this belief that literacy is liberation, right? If you can read and write and advocate for yourself in some way, you can have a better life for yourself and you can create a or work towards creating a better life for others as well. And I think that when um, things get broken down into checklists and when they get broken down into just sit there and be quiet and do your work, you're losing a big opportunity to really engage students in a different way.
Okay. So the joy would come in having a more complete
Hmm.
experience where people are engaged and happy to be learning and rather
And
than
it's
just
not always
checking
going
the
to be
box.
easy. And I think sometimes we think like joy has to equal fun or engagement has to equal like fun, but it doesn't, that's not necessarily true, right? Like you can have a rigorous task, but if it's like a group project or it's something that they can do, kind of parsing out those nuanced details, I think is important for educators. Like, I think we're always like, what can we do to make it fun for them? But like, what can we do to make it more of a joyful experience or an experience that they remember and can like look back and reflect on?
Mhm. Well, that's nice, yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm just very grateful for the experience that I had in Ghana and for the Ghanaian teachers and Tete and the American teachers too. I think when you are around teachers who have the same philosophy as you and who are as motivated um, as you, I just find it like I deeply respect that and I really admire that. About each of the teachers that were there, both Ghanaian and American, about how they are out of their comfort zone and being vulnerable and talking about their teaching and talking about their life. I don't think a lot of people are willing to step out of their comfort zone to do that. So I just feel very grateful that I got to be a part of that experience.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today, and I'm sure that maybe hopefully will inspire others to step out of their comfort zones and take a trip and maybe join the Witness Tree for Ghana for an institute for another year. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nancy.
If you would like to contact Maddie, email her at madeline.vukson, that's Vukson, at spps.com. I also would encourage you to read Maddie's compelling blog about her experiences in Ghana on the Witness Tree website at witnesstreeinstitute.org/2025blog/the places that speak by Madeline Vukson. You can find more information about Witness Tree Institute on their website at witnesstreeinstitute.org. There you can read blogs written by program participants and get more information about how to apply for the program. Follow their Facebook page at Witness Tree Institute. In addition, you can find YouTube videos on their director, Tete Kabla's YouTube channel, where he has two playlists, Witness Tree Institute Africa and Witness Tree Institute Contemporary Ghana. Thank you for listening. You can find out more about my writing for change on my website at nancyflinchbaugh.com or check out my YouTube channel at Nancy Flinchbaugh and also on Facebook at Nancy Flinchbaugh Author. The Writing for Change podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. Just search for Writing for Change, Nancy Flinchbaugh. Have a great day.